People are saying that you're millionaires, and if you are, you must be among the youngest in the world. If I can slip an infra-dig question in, are you actually millionaires?
George Harrison was known as the quiet Beatle. But when Yoko Ono entered their world, he spoke up first. He warned John. He confronted her directly. He saw the end coming before anyone else. During the Let It Be sessions, something finally broke inside him. After lunch on January 10th, 1969, he said 5 words and left. That simple goodbye meant everything. George knew the Beatles were finished, and he knew exactly who had helped destroy them. George Harrison was born on February 25, 1943 in a tiny house at 12 Arnold Grove, Waverley, Liverpool. The house had just one coal fire to fight off the freezing cold, and the toilet was outside. That was normal for working-class families at the time, but it made life hard. Liverpool itself was still scarred from World War II bombings. People like the Harrisons had to live with rationing until 1954. Food, clothes, and fuel were precious. George grew up in these tough conditions, but instead of making him bitter, it gave him strength and humility that stayed with him forever, even when he became one of the most famous men on earth. His mother, Louise, added something unusual to that humble childhood. While pregnant with George, she became fascinated with Indian culture. She tuned into Radio India, listening to the strange and beautiful sounds of sitars and tablas. This was rare in a place like Liverpool where most people stuck to Western music without knowing it. Louise gave George an early taste of something that would shape his future. Long before he met Ravi Shankar or traveled to India, George had already been touched by the music and spirit of the East. His mother's curiosity planted a seed that grew into his lifelong love for Indian philosophy and meditation. When George was about 12 or 13, everything changed during a simple bike ride. As he cycled past a neighbor's house, he heard Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel playing through an open window. The sound hit him like lightning. Rock and roll felt wild and full of promise. In that moment, music stopped being just something in the background. George suddenly saw a way out of poverty. That song made him dream of a bigger life, one filled with guitars and adventure. It was the spark that set him on the road to becoming a musician. School didn't interest him much after that. At the Liverpool Institute, he struggled and didn't do well in his studies. But while his teachers may have seen failure, George was busy learning something more important. He threw himself into the music of Carl Perkins, Little Richard, and Buddy Holly. He was drawn to Perkins's rockabilly twang, Little Richard's wild energy, and Buddy Holly's clever guitar work. While other kids memorized facts, George was learning how to make magic with 6 strings. His poor marks didn't hold him back. They pushed him forward. By 14, he had saved enough money to buy his first guitar, a Zenith acoustic. He taught himself to play by listening to records over and over, copying what he heard. He didn't have lessons or fancy teachers. Instead, he had determination. He played until his fingers hurt, mastering chords and styles that would later help him change music history. That teenage dedication didn't just make him a great guitarist. It made him fearless about trying new sounds like the sitar that no one else in rock was touching. At 14, another life-changing event happened. He met Paul McCartney at the Liverpool Institute. Paul was 15. They became friends through their shared love of the new rebellious music coming from America. George was quiet and focused on the guitar. Paul was talented and full of ideas. Together, they dreamed of a different future. Within a year, Paul introduced George to John Lennon, and that simple friendship became the start of something that would change the world. In March 1958, George joined the Quarrymen as lead guitarist at just 15 years old. The band was John Lennon's creation, but George brought new skill and energy. He wowed John by playing the tricky instrumental raunchy during an audition on a bus. Even though George was younger than the others, his talent made up for it. His arrival helped shape the band's sound and set them on the path that would turn them into the Beatles. The real test came in Hamburg, Germany between 1960 and 1962. The band played for hours each night, sometimes up to 8 hours straight, in rough clubs filled with rowdy crowds. They lived in small windowless rooms behind the stage and barely made enough to eat. The experience was brutal, but it made them stronger. They learned how to work a crowd and became a tighter band. By the time they came back to Liverpool, They were ready for anything. In 1962, they made a choice that shocked fans. Pete Best, their drummer, was let go. The decision wasn't easy, but the group felt he didn't quite fit. They brought in Ringo Starr, who brought a new spark to their music. With Ringo on drums, the classic Fab Four was complete and the final piece of the puzzle was in place. On February 9, 1964, something happened that America would never forget. The Beatles walked onto the stage of The Ed Sullivan Show. And in that moment, they changed everything. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr weren't just four young men from Liverpool anymore. They became legends. That night, 73 million people watched them. That was more than 60% of all TVs in America turned on to see them. It was the biggest television event the country had ever seen at that point. CBS was flooded with 50,000 ticket requests even though only 728 seats were available. People were desperate to be part of history. The Beatles played 5 songs. When they performed I Want to Hold Your Hand, the crowd went wild. Even the daughters of Vice President Richard Nixon were in the studio. The whole country was still heartbroken after President Kennedy's death just months before. The Beatles brought joy. They brought hope. That night wasn't just about music. It was the start of something new. Beatlemania swept across the country. The British invasion had begun. By April 4, 1964, the Beatles did something no one else had ever done. They held the top 5 spots on the Billboard Hot 100 chart at the same time. Number 1 was Can't Buy Me Love. Number 2 was Twist and Shout. Number 3 was She Loves You. Number 4 was I Want to Hold Your Hand. Number 5 was Please Please Me. In that year alone, 34 Beatles songs made it onto the Hot 100. 6 of them hit number 1. They weren't just topping the singles chart. Their albums Meet the Beatles and Introducing the Beatles were first and second on the album chart, too. For 1 week, half of America's top 10 songs belonged to them. No one came close for almost 60 years. And when someone finally tied the record in 2021, it was in the streaming era. The Beatles had done it with records people went out and bought. That week proved they weren't just popular. They were unstoppable. George Harrison, Quiet One, found his voice in 1963. While sick in a hotel room in Bournemouth, he wrote Don't Bother Me. He called it a fairly crappy song, but it meant the world to him. It showed he could write. The song made it on to With the Beatles in the UK and Meet the Beatles in the US. It sounded different from Lennon and McCartney's songs. Darker, more moody. It was a small step, but it gave George the courage to keep writing. One day, he would give the world something. And while my guitar gently weeps, but being in the Beatles wasn't easy for him, his songs were always pushed aside. Most albums had just 2 or 3 Harrison tracks. By the late 1960s, he had written so much that he showed producer Phil Spector literally hundreds of songs. Classics like All Things Must Pass and Isn't It a Pity didn't make it onto Beatles records. He felt trapped. He said waiting for his songs to be heard was like being constipated. During the Let It Be sessions, it became too much. He walked out. When he came back, it wasn't the same. His 1970 album, All Things Must Pass, finally showed the world what he had kept inside for so long. George's music wasn't the only thing that set him apart. In 1965, while filming Help, he first heard the sitar. It fascinated him. He bought one and used it on Norwegian Wood. That song changed everything. It was the first time a sitar appeared in Western pop. The sound was new, mysterious. Other bands copied it. Soon you heard sitars in songs by the Rolling Stones, the Byrds, and Donovan. George's cheap sitar from Oxford Street became famous. In 2024, it sold at auction for more than $53,000. The sitar had opened the door to a new world of music. Meeting Ravi Shankar in 1966 changed George's life even more. George was a rock star from Liverpool. Ravi was a respected Indian master. They came from different worlds, but they connected deeply. Ravi saw how serious George was about learning. George saw how spiritual and wise Ravi was. George wanted to move to India and study full-time. Ravi made him his student, something few outsiders had ever achieved so quickly. They traveled India together. George learned that mastering the sitar would take years of daily practice. Still, their bond grew. Ravi taught him about music, life, and the soul. In 1968, George led the Beatles to India. They stayed at an ashram in Rishikesh to learn transcendental meditation. They wanted peace. They wanted answers. They wrote 48 songs there in just a few weeks. But tension crept in. Lennon became restless. The strict routine wore them down. The trip was the most creative time of their lives, but also the beginning of the end for the band. Then came the scandal. The Maharishi who taught them was accused of making advances toward women at the ashram. Lennon was furious. He wrote Maharishi, "What have you done?" They left India angry and hurt. Lennon renamed the song Sexy Suddy. George felt torn. He still believed in meditation but was disillusioned. The trip changed the band forever. After India, George went deeper into Krishna consciousness. He chanted Hare Krishna every day. He helped bring the chant to the world. In 1969, he produced Hare Krishna Mantra and it reached number 12 in the UK. His hit My Sweet Lord was a prayer. He gave millions to the Krishna movement. George Harrison had always felt like the quiet one in the Beatles. But in 1968, he made a bold move that changed everything. He wrote a song called While My Guitar Gently Weeps. The idea came to him after reading the etching. He felt sad about the world's lack of love and the tension inside the Beatles. He believed no one took his song seriously. So he did something shocking. He invited Eric Clapton, a close friend and superstar guitarist, to play lead guitar on the track. The Beatles almost never let outsiders play on their records. But this time, Clapton's presence made John Lennon and Paul McCartney finally listen. The atmosphere in the studio changed. The song, recorded in September 1968, became a masterpiece. Clapton's solo and Harrison's haunting lyrics turned it into one of the Beatles' greatest songs. It showed the world that Harrison was just as talented as Lennon and McCartney. But things inside the band kept falling apart. On January 10, 1969, during the Let It Be sessions, Harrison reached his limit. After a morning of rehearsals at Twickenham Studios, he had enough. Paul's controlling ways, John's distance, and Yoko Ono's constant presence pushed him over the edge. After lunch, he got into a heated argument. Then he stood up and said, "See you around the clubs." And he walked out. The Beatles tried to carry on without him. They even joked about bringing in Eric Clapton to replace him. But it was clear the band was in crisis. The studio became a strange place that afternoon. They jammed aimlessly with Yoko singing. It felt like the Beatles were no longer the Beatles. That same day, Harrison went home and wrote Wah Wah. The title was a jab at the headache his bandmates were giving him. The song blasted the fake smiles and stress he felt trapped in. It was his way of saying he was done with the nonsense. When he recorded it for his solo album All Things Must Pass in 1970, it was the first track he laid down. The recording was huge. It had Clapton, Ringo Starr, members of Badfinger, and a massive sound that drowned out the memories of the Beatles. The song captured his anger and his freedom. Harrison didn't return to the Beatles without making demands. He told them they had to leave Twickenham and record at Apple Studios. He wanted no more talk of live shows, and he wanted a new, more relaxed way of working. The band agreed. His conditions let them finish Let It Be and even play one last show together, the famous rooftop concert. But everyone could see the cracks. The Beatles could only go on if they followed Harrison's terms. Later that year, Harrison finally got the respect he deserved. His song Something became the first Harrison aside single. It shared a record with Lennon's Come Together on the Abbey Road album. Inspired by his wife Pattie Boyd, Something was pure and beautiful. Frank Sinatra called it the greatest love song of the past 50 years. Fans and critics agreed. Harrison had proven he belonged at the top, right next to Lennon and McCartney. But tensions kept growing. Harrison had been honest from the start about Yoko Ono. He told her she had a bad reputation in New York and that she gave off bad vibes. John Lennon later admitted Harrison said it right to her face. Harrison wasn't being cruel. He was saying what many thought but didn't dare to say. Yoko broke the Beatles' biggest rule. No girlfriends or wives in the studio. She sat next to John whispering to him while they worked. Paul tried to keep things light by joking about it. But Harrison felt it more deeply. She had changed their space, their bond. One small moment summed it all up. During the Abbey Road sessions, Yoko took a biscuit from Harrison's speaker cabinet. He exploded. "That bitch," he yelled. Everyone froze. It wasn't about the biscuit. It was about respect, boundaries, and how much had changed. Harrison felt like Yoko's presence was the final straw. When he left the band that day in January 1969, he wrote in his diary, "LFT the Beatles." It was simple, but it said everything. The band he loved was gone. The tight group of boys from Liverpool no longer existed. The Beatles were finished in the way they used to be. Harrison saw it clearly, even if the others didn't want to face it yet. What happened next was like a dam breaking. For years, George Harrison had waited quietly while the world focused on Lennon and McCartney songs. George brought in Phil Spector. Spector was famous for his wall of sound, a rich, layered way of recording that filled every space with music. Together, they worked on George's solo album, All Things Must Pass. Spector turned George's simple demos into grand, powerful songs. They added strings, choirs, and booming drums. The album featured stars like Eric Clapton and members of Badfinger. When people heard songs like My Sweet Lord and What Is Life, they knew George was not just a quiet Beatle anymore. He had found his true voice. When All Things Must Pass came out in November 1970, it was a triple album, one of the first of its kind. It had more than 20 songs. The music was rich, emotional, and deeply spiritual. Critics said it was better than much of what the Beatles had done in their final years. The album showed the world that George was a genius in his own right. It remains one of the greatest solo works by any Beatle. My Sweet Lord became a huge hit. It was the first solo song by a Beatle to hit #1 in America in 1970. But its success came with trouble. The publisher of a 1963 hit called his So Fine sued George, saying he had copied their melody. After years in court, the judge said George had copied it without meaning to. In 1981, George paid $587,000 to settle the case. He later joked about it in a song called This Song. The whole experience was painful, but George felt the message of My Sweet Lord mattered more than the lawsuit. George also showed his heart in another way. On August 1, 1971, he and Ravi Shankar held the concert for Bangladesh. 2 shows took place in one day at Madison Square Garden, with 40,000 people attending. They raised nearly $250,000 that day and millions more from album and film sales. It was the first big rock concert for charity, inspiring later events like Live Aid. George proved that music could help heal the world. But his personal life was falling apart. George shocked his closest friends by having an affair with Maureen Storkey, Ringo's wife. Maureen had married Ringo in 1965. Now in the early 1970s, she was often at George's home. One night, Pattie Boyd, George's wife, caught them together behind a locked door. She banged on the door while George laughed from inside. When he opened it, he acted like nothing was wrong. Pattie said this was the moment she knew her marriage was over. Things got worse at a dinner party. In front of everyone, George told Ringo, "You know, Ringo, I'm in love with your wife." The room fell silent. Maureen ran and locked herself in the bathroom. Ringo, heartbroken, could only say, "Better you than someone we don't know." John Lennon later called it like incest. That's how deep the betrayal felt. The brotherhood of the Beatles had shattered. On New Year's Eve 1974, George told Pattie he wanted a divorce. It was a cruel end to a painful year. Pattie had already started seeing Ronnie Wood, but the way George ended it hurt deeply. The divorce was final in 1977. George Harrison's life after the Beatles was a journey filled with risks, heartbreak, triumphs, and near tragedies. In 1974, he tried to turn his dream of supporting new musicians into reality by creating Dark Horse Records. He wanted to help artists like Ravi Shankar and Splinter while controlling his own music. But it wasn't easy. The label's first deal with M Records fell apart. When Harrison missed a key album deadline because of hepatitis, M sued him for $10 million and cut ties. This was a huge setback. Already spent $3 million on Dark as artists. But only Splinter's song Costafine Town became a modest hit. Harrison had to return a $1 million advance and rush to sign with Warner Brothers just in time for his album 33 1/3. What started as a hopeful project to support others turned into a tough lesson about the music business. In 1978, Harrison showed the world his courage and generosity. Monty Python's Life of Brian was about to be canceled when EMI Films pulled out at the last moment. Harrison didn't let that happen. He mortgaged his beloved Friar Park home to raise $3 million and started Handmade Films. His only reason, he joked, was that he really wanted to see the movie. The risk worked. Life of Brian earned $21 million in the US alone. Handmade Films went on to give Britain some of its most loved cult movies like Time Bandits and Withnail, and Harrison's leap of faith helped save British cinema at a time when it was struggling. His personal life was just as dramatic. Harrison married Patty Boyd in 1966 after meeting her on a hard day's night, but their relationship cracked under the weight of fame, infidelities, and his spiritual quests. His close friend Eric Clapton fell deeply in love with Boyd, writing Layla about his longing for her. When Boyd finally left Harrison in 1977 and married Clapton in 1979, it could have destroyed their friendship. Instead, Harrison attended their wedding and even joked about being their husband-in-law. Boyd became the muse behind songs like Harrison's Something and Clapton's Layla and Wonderful Tonight. The letters they wrote to her sold for over $3.6 million in 2024, showing just how much their story still fascinates people. As the years passed, Harrison struggled to match the success of his former bandmates. His albums in the mid-70s didn't impress critics or sell well. He was seen as the quiet Beatle who no longer fit in. Illness and exhaustion during his 1974 tour left his voice hoarse, and his album Dark Horse was rushed and poorly received. Harrison pulled away from the spotlight and focused on film and personal projects. It wasn't until the Traveling Wilburys in the late 80s that he truly found his footing again. Harrison's voice never fully recovered. Smoking and years of strain damaged his throat. His 1974 tour was especially painful. Laryngitis left him struggling to sing, and his critics were harsh. The years of performing took a toll, and in 1997 he was diagnosed with throat cancer. He beat it at first, but lung cancer followed in 2001, spreading to his brain. Even as his health failed, Harrison stayed positive. He told his fans, "I'm not going to die on you folks just yet. I am very lucky." The comeback he achieved with Cloud 9 in 1987 was nothing short of amazing. After years out of the charts, Harrison returned with platinum sales and a #1 hit in the US, Got My Mind Set on You. That song, a cover of a 1962 R&B tune, reintroduced him to a new generation. His collaboration with Jeff Lynne made Cloud 9 fresh and exciting, proving Harrison could still compete in the MTV era. He embraced music videos, and When We Was Fab became a fun, nostalgic hit packed with Beatles references. In 1988, Harrison helped form the Traveling Wilburys with Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, and Roy Orbison. It started with one song, Handle with Care, that was just too good to waste. In 10 days, they recorded an entire album that became a huge success. The group's mix of talent and friendship created something magical, even though it lasted only a short time. Through it all, Harrison stayed true to his spiritual beliefs. He meditated, practiced yoga, and remained a vegetarian from 1968 until his death. He spoke often of his search for God and saw all religions as part of the same truth. Despite the fame, he kept his heart focused on peace. But peace was shattered. On December 30th, 1999, a man named Michael Abram broke into Harrison's home and stabbed him over 40 times. Harrison's lung collapsed and he was close to death. His wife Olivia fought off the attacker with a lamp and even grabbed his testicles to stop him. Police arrived just in time. Harrison later said he felt his life draining away as he lay bleeding. Doctors said it was a miracle he survived. The attack left scars deeper than the wounds. Eric Clapton said Harrison was never the same. He became withdrawn, and the trauma seemed to break the calm he had worked so hard to find. Not long after, his cancer returned. Keith Richards believed that the attack weakened Harrison so much that he couldn't fight off the disease. Harrison passed away on November 29, 2001, at age 58. Surrounded by his family and listening to sitar music, he left the world in peace. His ashes were scattered in the river Ganges as he had wished. His final message was simple and true. Life is fragile like a raindrop on a lotus leaf.